All right. Yeah, today's one of those days. Have you been hearing me at all? I think, the mic was off a bit. So, my wonderful beginning and introduction. I mean, those of you who could read lips, you know what I said. But let me just repeat for those of us who don't read lips so well. Welcome to Journey to SEA 2025. Today's session is going to be a good one. Never mind the little rocky start and so on, because we are actually going to do an analysis of a story. Now, I gave my students a particular prompt, and a few of them responded, and I went through it with them, and I thought, I could mix and match some of their ideas so that I could show you how to go through a story. So stick around for that. Call your friends. For those who are available, let them know. Definitely check out this episode. We're on to episode 28. Imagine that. And we're looking at event reports, which is one of the key report formats for SEA. And we're also going to talk a little bit more about keywords in comprehension questions because I am working with a student this week. I gained some insight into how students really understand and use keywords. So I wanted to share some of that with you today. And for those of you who don't know who I am, my name is Shelly Ann Edwards Byron, and I'm a creative writing specialist focused on making comprehension and creative writing less painful. And how we do that is by adding in some activities through multisensory learning and identifying like key strategies that students could implement and work with. So, thank you so much for those of you who are joining. If you're continuing, really appreciate it. And yeah, I hope, because it's live, I can't just like edit out the the first few minutes. So yeah, we all lived through that. So let's move on and get to the information for today. Let me share my window. Where are we? Nice. So, episode 28, closer look at events, analyzing short stories, well, a short story, and more on comprehension practice. All right. So, before we get into that, just a few reminders for this week. Stubbornness is a desire for independence. Now, I know as parents and teachers, we see what we call stubbornness in children when it comes to trying to get them to do certain things. And as a tutor, I think I get a larger share of it because um, there's this concept in students at the primary school level. Miss says this, and whatever Miss says, that's what they are attempting to do. And the thing is, they are attempting their interpretation of what Miss said. Because sometimes when you talk to Miss or when you find out exactly what Miss said, you realize that student might have misinterpreted things a little bit, but that doesn't stop them from holding on to it and sticking to their guns. And so what I realized is that a lot of this is coming from the position where the child is in. They really want to do well. And once they get an idea and they think what they're doing is going to help them do well, that's what they're sticking to because they really want to be independent learners. They don't want to have people telling them what to do all the time. Even the ones who get stuck in this, they feel like you have to guide them through everything. We do gradually have to ease off from our students and teach them that independence in writing and comprehension in all their schoolwork. And sometimes stubbornness comes into play, and sometimes it's a desire for independence. And so, what I usually do when I'm dealing with that kind of situation is ask a lot of questions. Like, I had a student who told me that I could not use the word because in the answer to a particular question for the reason that it doesn't fit the question because it's not an appropriate response. So I said, okay, how do you formulate the answer? And we started going through and questioning. And then he used the word because in his response. So I said, wait, hold up. How do you get to use because and I don't get to use it? He stopped and he thought and he thought. He said, well, maybe it's okay to use it. I said, yes, it is. It is okay to use it. And so we eventually worked around that. So asking questions is a really good way to make a point. It's not about telling the students, well, no, you're wrong. Do it this way. When you're dealing with students who are in a particular mode and they believe they know what they're supposed to do and they're very keen on doing it, we have to find really creative ways to work around that to show them and demonstrate to them that this is an option for them that might work better than the original that they have. Because the reason students work with me is not because they just want to know from scratch, is usually because whatever they're doing at school isn't helping them as well as it should. Because still children learn differently. We have all kinds of different approaches, and not every approach is good for every child. So we have to find the ones that work, but sometimes because of what they've been exposed to, they're a little bit stubborn. And so we need to find ways to work through that in a calm way, and asking questions is one of the best ways. And the last thing is to keep good records. Now, this is like across the board, this is like a life lesson thing. It's something that I often have challenges with in terms of keeping good records. But what I mean in particular in this situation for you as parents and teachers working with students on their writing and comprehension, you always want a starting point and you do want to keep record of how the student is performing as you go, because what's happening is that sometimes students get frustrated. I mean, they definitely would reach to a point where they feel like they're not making progress or things are, challenging them too much. It's a really good idea at that point to show them where they started and to see the progress as they go. Because I had a student once who, let's say they're being graded out of 20, and after about a year working with him, we were still at like 12 or 14. And I thought, okay, that's kind of low still, right? So then, in doing a review and doing my report for his parents, I asked his mom to pull his records from school for the past year, his end of term. And so we looked at it side by side. And what we found is that he was actually at an 8 roughly when we began. And so while it might have looked like, okay, 12, 14, that's like still lower than we wanted, he had almost doubled his scores. And that is an amazing feat. And so when we keep the records and we're able to look back and then see where the student was and where they are now, we can empower and encourage students and tell them, hey, we're you're doing okay. You have improved quite a lot, and you can keep improving, and we can continue to encourage them that way. So that is, these are the reminders that I had this week. And so I really wanted to share this one with you, especially with the records, because I realize that sometimes, when we finished with an activity, we pack it up. And I hear lots of times, students who are preparing for SEA, they have stacks and stacks of papers. And with these stacks and stacks of papers, we we just, want to toss them out. I wrote the essay. Um, we revised it, I rewrote it, we're going on to another prompt. So we stack that aside and it's just there. We don't go back to it. Sometimes it's useful to go back to those from before. So we do need to keep them and we need to go back to them from time to time so that both you and the student would know, hey, we have seen improvement. You can look at maybe the score has not increased, but you can look at the actual writing because remember, a score is a range. When a student gets a 16 or a 15 or a 10, even, it's a range of things. So you can have improvement and not make a change on the score, but overall there's an improvement, and then you know that you're building on that to eventually make a change in the score to make a more positive impact on the score. So keeping records and having them organized, okay, these are reports, these are narratives, these are comprehension papers, and you have the topics, what was worked on, and so on. Keeping those kinds of records really help students to look at where they were and where they are now and make a movement and improvement on that. So, all right. So before I get into what we're doing today exactly, I want to share with you the programs that I'm doing during the vacation. So this vacation, I've decided to put a little bit more emphasis on training teachers and parents instead of working with the students alone, because I've recognized that students who do really well are the students who have the support outside of classes. They have that follow up. And the number one thing I hear all the time from parents is that I'm not a creative writing instructor, so I don't know how to do this. But guess what? You don't have to be an instructor. You don't have to have all the, fancy details to be able to help your child. And so this series that I'm doing this December is meant to give you what you need to help your child. And for teachers who are enrolling, I'm going to be covering as detailed as the questions come and giving you worksheets and different things that you could help children, whether in a class or in a one on one situation as working with your child. And so the first thing, the first couple of classes, and this is December 9 and 10, is going to be in the evening so that you can do it after work and after everything settled in. So it's a 2 hour session and 2 days, 2 hours, so 4 hours altogether. So half seven to half nine, and that's when the program is going to run, and that's December 9 and 10, 375 materials included. So you'll get the I'll be emailing you the worksheets and all those things so that you could use them, and I'll show you how to use the worksheets and so on. But the main thing that parents and teachers both need to understand is how to give feedback, because I see lots of notes on papers. As you can imagine, I'm an after school teacher. Um, I see lots of notes and comments from teachers. Some of them give effective feedback, but many of them don't. And also, parents themselves, you don't know exactly what to tell the child to help them improve, because you can have the idea, you can understand it. The child could have the idea and understand it, but what do they do to improve? So we're going to start with understanding what feedback is, recognizing when you look at something, how do you recognize what to improve? And then finally, how to give that advice to the writer, the young writer, your child or your student, to help them improve. And then on the 11th and 12th, we're looking at sentence structure. One of the things that I see quite a lot is like sentences that all begin the same. And I've spoken about that before. I also see sentences that they don't have any excitement. There's no description in them and whatnot. um, it's not enough adding in descriptive words. We do have to look at how this sentence is structured and different ways that we could create that exciting, interesting sentence. And so we're going to look at identifying a variety of sentence starters as well as, story transitions, because sometimes, it just feels like one thing is happening and then something else suddenly starts happening. We have to figure that out. So this one is the 11th and 12th of December, and same time, 7:30 to 8:30 to 9:30, and this is what we're covering. Then I'm also going to be looking at descriptive writing that makes sense. There's nothing worse in a story than some random descriptions or awkward descriptions that you wonder, like, huh, what was this writer thinking here? And sometimes students fall into that trap because they know they have to include the descriptions, but they don't know how to actually include the descriptions. And so that's what I'm going to teach parents and instructors here, how to get your child to improve their description. So we're going to look at characters and setting, and how to, some strategies for characters, some strategies for setting, and you'd get a couple worksheets as well that you could use and reuse to help your child or your student work through descriptions and adding descriptions with their stories. And then finally, we're going to look at getting stories more exciting. Sometimes even the descriptions don't feel exciting in a story. The key to actually creating exciting stories is working on the emotions and emotional responses. So that's the main thing that we're going to focus on here. So, what exactly makes it exciting? We're going to discuss that in detail. We're going to look at how to build rising action properly. I've spoken about that a lot, and I'm going to offer you a program, a course to teach you what I've been talking about because I can tell you, but then when you're dealing with your student, how do you deal with it? How do you deal with the descriptions? How do you explain to the child how to add in the descriptions effectively? So I'm going to give you some skills and strategies for doing that. Um, and so you could be able to, when the papers come home, when the activities come home, you know what to do at home if you're a parent. And at school, when you want to do things quickly, because of course, yes, we still have to work with time, whether time in the day, time for the lesson, timing for the actual writing. So I'm going to show you how to do a lot of these things a lot more quickly so you have those skills and strategies. And so those are the areas that I'd be focusing on. So registration is open. I don't have the forms up yet, but definitely WhatsApp me 717-4993 and you get all the information that you need to register and sign up for the class. Okay, so the forms are going to go up later today. I was aiming for last week, but like I said, last week was kind of a week. And we're so happy and grateful to be on this side of it. All right. Okay, so let's get into what we're supposed to be looking at today. Okay, so we're looking at events, and in order to look at event reports, here's what I want to show you. Now, of course, if you have the 5 reports challenge, then you would be going to, I'll tell you what booklet. You are going to booklet number 5. And booklet number 5 is where you get all of the information about the event reports, where you get what goes into each paragraph and all those things. So I'm gonna share with you just a couple things. So we're gonna look at um I'm gonna look at the 2022 and 2024 SEA exam prompts because they are both reports, and we're going to look at event reports definitions just a little bit. So let me share screen and then we can get into that. All right, so this is in booklet number 5, as I said, for the 5 reports series. Now I'm just going to show you part of it, and the rest of it, get a copy, and you're going to have all the details. You have prompts, sample report, everything that will help you and your child understand, or your students understand, the event reports. So let's take a look at what an event report actually is, and then we will go to the prompts and identify what those prompts would look like for SEA. So, event reports describe the details of situations like presentations, school festivals, and visits by prominent people. There are no prizes or winners, but there are often awards and tokens of appreciation. Now, a lot of times students ask, okay, so what's the difference between an activity and an event? And why do I have a distinction between activities and events? Well, the thing with an event is that think about it like you have a speaker and an audience. Anytime you have a speaker audience situation, that's an event. because it changes the way the interaction is and it changes the role of participants. For example, in an activity, participants are very active, they're all doing things. In an event, you generally have a speaker doing most of the activity and the audience just paying attention and listening. Sometimes you might have that question and answer situation, but it's usually organized at one part of the event. It's not an overall thing in the event. Alternatively, you would have like a participant doing things and the audience listening, like in a concert or a festival or presentation. But then the interaction between the audience and the presenter is very different from in an activity where at the end of it you have a product or you have like lessons and information. It's a little bit different. So it's good to recognize what an event is all about so that students would know the kind of situation. Also, in an event, we have preliminary activities similar to the way in a competition we might have preliminary activities, which are different from what an activity would have. In an activity, you're generally given materials or you're taken somewhere, um, and that creates the preliminary stuff that you'd put in paragraph two. In an event, however, your preliminary details would usually be like preparation for the event and the first couple minutes or 10, 15 minutes of the event where you have introduction of speakers saying what the event is about and all those types of things. There's quite often a purpose for an event in terms of like an overall objective that would be a little different from what you would have as an activity. And so these are some of the distinctions that make an activity different from an event. Now, you're really looking at like a function or a program, and quite often you have speakers and, like presenters. And so you're really thinking about outlining the program, highlighting main ideas from the presentation. And usually at the end, we have like a vote of thanks, thanking people for turning up, for participating, for doing things. And then sometimes you have cleanup after as well, depending on what the presentation is. And so recognizing what the event is and how the event would present itself makes a difference. So let's take a look at the ooh, this is tiny. Let's see if we can get that a little bit bigger. Yeah, that's good. Um in terms of the event. So in this one, we have three prompts, right? The first one, medical professional visited your school and addressed your class. That one is definitely a event because you have speaker, audience, address the class, right? Um, excuse me, taking care of the vegetable garden, that's an activity, field trip, somebody slipped, that's an accident, right? And so you could look at it and recognize what type of report you're working with. So I want to focus on the event. So maybe I could bring that a little bit bigger so maybe you can see it better. All right, I think that's as big as I could go for now. All right, so let's look at this a little bit more closely. Right? Medical professional visited your school and addressed your class. Write a report to your teacher about the visit. Date, time, place, and the person who visited, activities that occurred during the visit, and what was learned. And so I'd like you to pay attention to that part in particular. Events quite often have what was learned. You get that question. And I think in the 2024, when we look at it in a moment, you might see that again. But it's not something that students quite often get practice in expressing themselves on how to say that in a report. Now, the best way to do that is to put it in reported speech, have someone else say it, because you don't want to get too casual with the statement to say, well, I learned this. Now, remember, in this case, the medical professional is addressing your entire class. So you are part of the class, and um, you can group yourself into categories like students and so on. And you don't have to identify yourself as an individual within the class who learned anything in particular, but you can say the class learned, or, a student from the class raised their hand and expressed that they learned, etc. And you could give whatever details. But it's important to recognize a couple things with this event report. You have the professional who you have to name. So you have to say who visited, right? You get to decide what professional. Is it a nurse? Is it a doctor? Is it a scientist? Some sort of medical professional. You get to decide as a writer. And we have to list activities that occurred during the visit. So the person addressed the class, maybe they did a demonstration, maybe they had students participate in different things. You can have a paramedic come to teach CPR. Paramedics are medical professionals. So we could brainstorm about, what options there are here that students could work with. But again, a key part of this is that lesson learned, and sometimes students might get a little bit confused about how to express that lesson learned, because we do have lessons learned in narratives as well. And when we have a lesson learned in narratives, it's usually very expressive and detailed and so on. In this lesson learned, you want to state direct to the point, no descriptions per se. So, at the end of the session, students learned how to do the Heimlich maneuver, how to do CPR, how to, properly wash their hands before and after eating and after using the toilet. And so we have to give like those kinds of specifics. And option generally say that, or at the end of the presentation during the question and answer period, the presenter inquired about what students learned, and somebody raised their hand and said something, right? So there are lots of different ways that that is done, but definitely we see an event report in 2022. And let's see in 2023. So this first one says it's an incident. The second one, something fell, so that's pretty much an accident incident. Your class organized and participated in an activity. But then it says write a report to your principal about the event. So the thing about event reports that you also have to recognize is that SEA uses event and activity kind of interchangeably. Now, for simplicity, I have separated events from activities in the ways that I described earlier, where the event would be, a situation where you have an audience, and an activity would be something that you'd participate in more detail. So this one I would put under activity and not necessarily event. So, okay, so we don't quite have an event report in this one. I think the 2019 had an event. Let me get that one up. The 2019 event was a function, right? So that's this here. Let's see. This last one. So you're writing about a function, and anything to do with a function like this, where you have to describe the function itself, that would be an event, because you have a program, You have a series of actions where you have presenters and audience. And so, um, this Know Your Country tour is a kind of mix because you do have that lesson learned happening here as well. Because you have tour guides and the students as an audience. And so this is where events and activities get kind of blurred depending on the kind of situation. So it's always important to recognize that there are some overlaps. And like I said, SEA uses events and um, activities kind of interchangeably, but we try to make a distinction so that students could sort of create strategies for responding to each of them. And so if you get your hands on the um, 5 reports challenge, I give like a paragraph by paragraph breakdown on the events. You also have that for activities because you have all the 5 different types of reports in that package. And it's a digital package. So, once you get to the once you get the package, you get all the information that would be included in that. So let's see, what are you working on this week? So you want to review the before, during, and after, and make sure students are able to identify the 3 to 5 different actions for events. So before in an event would be introduction of the speaker, like in that medical um, professional situation, introduction of the speaker, the beginning of what the speaker said. Then you'd have during, which would be any activities or demonstrations that the speaker did, calling students up to do things. And then the end, which is the immediately after, would be the wrapping up of their presentation. And then in the outcomes and consequences, which would be your paragraph 5, then you're looking at maybe like vote of thanks, because a presenter wouldn't come into a school without the, you know, teacher always saying, okay, designating somebody, usually the class prefect or somebody, to stand up and say, on behalf of the class and of the school, we thank you for coming. We do those types of things. So that is not necessarily immediately after. So you want to break it down and take a really good look at that 5 paragraph structure and what is supposed to go into each section when you have an event. And then you want to look at how to express lessons learned. We want to look at vocabulary associated with certain events. And then you want to write a complete event report. All right. So that's what you're working on this week. Um, Resources, like I said, the 5 reports challenge, you have that. You have this booklet number 5 is the events. And so you can get a really good look. You have prompts as well that you can help you. And then if you just want to look at planning the reports, then you have 25 worksheets here that can help with making sure students have that organization. Plus, you have the for each worksheet, there's a prompt so that you have 25 prompts here. So after you plan, you can continue with the writing and get a lot of practice out of this. And if you have both, that would be 15 to 18, I think, prompts in this one. And so that's at least, you have more than 40 prompts between the two of them that you can practice. Plus, you get some samples in the 5 reports challenge. And okay, now let's move on to the story. And today, like I said, we're analyzing an actual story. So let me get that up. Where is the actual story? Here we go. Let me see how big I can get this for you. Yeah, I think you'd be able to read this. Okay, so of course, if you have to analyze a story, so the number one thing is if you're going to be analyzing a story, you need the prompt. It'll be a little challenging to analyze a story and to tell the student whether or not they have effectively responded to the prompt if you don't have the prompt. So you always have to start with the prompt. And with this one, I keep forgetting I needed to make that change. All right, so Candace had made another mistake during science class. This time she accidentally mixed the wrong chemicals. Write a story based on this scenario, and you're going to be including um what are we including? What was going on in science class, what Candace saw, heard, and felt, and how the experience ended. Now, this is science class. I mean, this is just screaming science fiction, right? I mean, you can't have a more perfect prompt other than, you saw an alien kind of thing, right? So it's screaming science fiction. So we do have that whole kind of science fiction element that we could work with. Now, of course, it could be realistic fiction where, things happen as they would, nobody turns into anything. Um, you could have a fantasy, so whatever happens in the science class maybe opens a portal to another world, so we get the science fiction fantasy happening as well. So even though to me it just screams science fiction, you can actually respond in a variety of ways to the prompt. Now let's look at the response. The response says Candice was in a musty classroom trying to complete her test. She had failed all the others. She started to get distracted, so she picked up the wrong jars and mixed. I typed it up and right, mixed them up. The chemicals in the jar reacted and it got hotter and hotter by the second. Thinking that she couldn't risk it falling on her, Candace picked up the jar and threw it out the window. Unfortunately, it hit. Yeah, I was really typing quickly when I did this. It hit a child playing in the courtyard. The child screamed as the chemicals reacted. It turned him into a creature that started to rampage. Candace decided to mix other chemicals together to counteract the previous ones. After she finished mixing it, she threw it out the window at the child. After a while, the child became normal again. After that experience, she learned to always pay attention to science class. On top of everything, she got an F in her test. She hoped the child's parents wouldn't charge her. So, all right. Now, this particular response, it feels like a rushed response because the pacing of it is like everything just happened quickly and readers were kind of told. Now, in analyzing a story like this, the first thing we check is with the prompt. Um, what do we get from the prompt that was used in the story and was it used in the way it should have been used? So it goes back to analyzing prompts. Now, in the Seven Stories Challenge, there's an entire booklet on how to analyze prompts and to make the best use of the prompt. Um, so we know that she's in science class. Um, we know that she made a mistake and we know that she mixed the wrong chemicals. So we're given some details that absolutely must be used. Now, the rule of thumb is to use all of these details that come from the prompt, especially the main uh, information sentences. So, like the first one or two sentences, use that in the introduction. So, that was done well. We have all of these details mentioned in the introduction. Um, and then we have a problem introduced into paragraph 2, and then paragraph 3 has kind of like how things ended and her lesson learned. So we have some of the major aspects of what this story should have. Now we go into detail with the plot. So when we're going through a story, we double check with the prompt first, and then we go to the plot. And I use that 12-point plot format. So that's something that would be useful for you to have a copy of the 12-point plot format. And we want to double check that. So we're looking for exposition, which is what most teachers call it: exposition, rising action, climax, falling action, resolution, right? Now, of course, in mind, we go one, two, three, four, five, we have that development. So let's see. Exposition happens in paragraph one. This is a three-paragraph story, right? Um, while many students would want to aim for five or more paragraphs, it's perfectly okay to have a three-paragraph story if you have enough information in each paragraph. A three-paragraph story can score well into 14, 16 just with three paragraphs if each paragraph is done well. Now, the way you would break it up into three paragraphs is that, well, you have your exposition, and then you have the body, and then you have climax, falling action, resolution. I would put that here in the third paragraph so that you'd have more time to explore and explain. Um, so the introduction has all the details that are needed, but then when we get to the problem, turn him into a creature that started to rampage. Um, we're kind of just told a lot of things in this story. If we look at it, we know where Candace was. She's doing her test. We don't know when this happened. So we're missing that detail of time because in the introduction, when you introduce the setting, you're doing both place and time. We know she's in a musty classroom, so that's a check mark there. But what time is the story taking place? Sometime during school hours, but that's like what, from 8 to 3? What is it, morning, afternoon? When is this thing happening? So we're missing that detail. We got a background information, but we just kind of told she started to get distracted. What distracted her? We don't know. um, Chemicals in the jar reacted. What did that look like? What did it sound like? So we don't really have too many sensory details in the story. We're pretty much told everything. And so it got hotter and hotter by the second. So we do have temperature, which is part of touch. But then that's about it. So we know it got hotter, but what got hotter? The chemicals, the jar, you know. Um, we don't really get a description either. So not a lot of adjectives, not many adverbs, not many words that appeal to senses. And so she picked up the jar and threw it out the window. If it's getting hotter and hotter, how did she pick it up and throw it out the window? So again, we kind of just told about this. So overall, the main issue in this one is that the readers are told too many things. It's not explained, it's not described. And so, again, turned into a creature, not explained, not described. What did the creature look like? We don't have any character description. So, you're working with that 12 point in terms of the plot, and you're working with the holistic rubric, which outlines what you're supposed to have. We need character description. We don't have any character description. And so, in terms of plot, we have our hook, we have um, the introduction, exposition, we have the complication that it got hotter and hotter, and her reaction to that was to throw it out the window. Um, and then we have a bigger problem with the monster. But then we don't have a bigger problem beyond that. We just have the monster. We don't know what the monster is doing. And then how did Candace get to figure out that this is what she should do? Right? And then in as part of the 12-point plot, students are taught to um, have the emotional reaction. So there's a reaction formula that students use to be able to describe how characters react to situations. So the monster is on a rampage, and we don't know how Candace is feeling. We don't know what exactly she's doing. I mean, where did she find the chemicals to mix? How did she know which ones to mix? Um, we don't get any of those details. So there are a lot of details missing, a lot of descriptions missing, both character and setting, and like sequences and the actions. We jump. Monster turns up, Candace mixes a thing, and it just feels too easy. There isn't much of rising tension in this story, because we don't get emotional responses. Remember, I said what really creates, so that's a misconception that a lot of people have. And I think in the beginning, it was also one that I held, where you have to have conflict in a story in order to make the story exciting. But conflict alone is not what's going to make the story exciting, because we have conflict in here. We have the chemicals mixing, we have the child turning into the monster. Those are major points of conflict. But it's not as exciting a story as it could have been because we don't get any emotional reactions. Yeah. And so, in a case like this, what I would advise the student to do is to go back to the 12 point, um, plot the story according to the 12 point to see what you have and what is missing, and then fill in the missing bits. So we definitely need some emotional reactions. We definitely need some more behavior reactions. So, like between Rampage and Candace, right here, that you could probably get a whole paragraph between there, to be honest. Because what is the creature doing? How is it escalating? Does Candace try anything? I mean, again, before she mixes the right chemicals, does she make another mistake and mix the wrong ones and make it even bigger or more ferocious? And so, yes, we do need that conflict, but then we also need the reaction. Um, and then in the ending, after the experience, after a while, pretty good transition, but it doesn't say what happened. When it comes to like monster stories, creature stories, we want details. What did the creature look like? How did it happen to, turn back into the student? Um, was that process? What was that process like? There's so many details that could have gone into this. And so even with the knowledge that we have to add in details, we always start with the plot. So we're going to go back to the plot first, see what we have, see what's missing, and then when we're adding in the details for the plot, we would also add in the descriptions and so on. And so I thought it would have been a really good idea to kind of go through something like this with you so that you could see some of the thought process. Now, of course, if you want to learn how to recognize what I just described, and you want some worksheets and practice materials that you can give to a student to kind of follow through on this, then that's when you want to join that how to do descriptions. So there's the how to do descriptions and then how to do the exciting story. Those two would benefit you the most if you want to be able to. And again, you don't have to be a creative writing teacher to understand, hey, this is missing this, because you'd have a template to know, do you have this? Do you have that? Do you have that? And when you see what you have and you see what you don't have, then what's the next step? You might want to pay attention to the giving feedback workshop, and so pretty much all the workshops would kind of give you bits and pieces that would help you be as comprehensive as possible doing things. But of course, if you think you want to do one or more, send me a WhatsApp message, 7174993, and make sure you get in on the workshops so that you can do your best to support teachers and tutors as a parent. And as a teacher, you can support your students as best as you can and be able to let your parents know, hey, you can try this at home, do this at home, because you want that support to really help students effectively. Of course, the parents that are involved, the better students do. So you work with what you have, but if you can get parents involved, they would say, well, miss, I don't know. Well, then here's what? Here's a worksheet. Have them do this kind of thing. And so that's what you'd be getting when you do the workshop. So we'd be able to, I'd go through, okay, like some of these things here, like this hook, for example, we can probably make this hook a lot more exciting. Um, Beginning a paragraph with a pronoun, it and him, and again using a pronoun in the first sentence of a paragraph. There are some sentence structure issues that I'd be able to identify and help with. And then we have she beginning here. She started, so back to back words, sentences beginning with the same words and same structure. So even though we have different words here, Candice was, might as well be she was. Um, and here, let's see, the child screamed, might as well have been he screamed. And so, we do have the sentence structure to look at. And so in that workshop, I'll be dealing with that as well. So I think it's being able to like go through and analyze the stories. At the very least, what you're doing is using the rubric as a checklist. Do we have these things? And using the 12-point plot as a checklist. Do we have these things in your stories? And then from there, you can identify what's missing, and then you begin looking at how to add it in. All right. And so that's the process that I go through with students. Of course, if you have a class of 30 students, 28, 25, in fact, anything more than like 10 students at a time to do something like that is going to be pretty challenging. But there are ways to work around it. And certainly when you have worksheets that you can do a check, 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 check with, then you'd be able to get things done a lot more quickly. So sometimes having students assist in marking each other's work can help them understand what they need in their own. Because there's nothing like a student marking their peers' work to tell you, hey, you're missing your description. I'm not seeing this and I'm not seeing that. Listen, they get hyper because it's like they have to stick it to their friends and their classmates, yeah? And so they're able to notice things. And part of that process helps build their critical and creative thinking. And remember, we had a whole conversation about critical and creative thinking. So yeah, it's worth it. And so check out the workshops that I'm doing in December. So in addition to what I'll be talking about and what I share on the lives, you would actually be able to pull a worksheet and do this. So lots of times when I say, okay, this week you're working on such and such, you might have to scramble and pull information from here, there, and everywhere. But then, how do you put it together? Well, in the workshops, I'll be giving you worksheets and telling you exactly how to use them, demonstrating, and we'd be able to work on some things. And so, and of course, for both parents and teachers, if you want to work with samples that you want me to specifically go through, and I can show you how to do it with your own child's writing and with students' own writing, because of course this is like a random put together of stuff from a child's response and different students responses, but what you have to deal with in terms of your own child's individual writing and your own students individual writing. So walk with them, we can share, and I'll show you how to identify what you need to identify and how to give the advice to fix it. All right. So, okay, so that is what we're doing with the um narratives this week. You want to go back through the revising and editing. You want to look at plotting. You want to look at the writing process and just keep repeating that so that the child has that understanding that this is all part of it. And then you want to do another timed narrative, right? So you could spend some time analyzing like a previous narrative and then come back to doing another one to see, what the improvement is. And of course, remember, as I said, you're going to be keeping record of all of these things. All right. Definitely if you want samples and you want the breakdown, you want a copy of the 12-point plot, it's included in this in the introductory booklet. Um, I have posters and flashcards. I know that helps students a lot when they could go through the flashcards, actually hold it in their hand. They have the poster where they see it on the wall. So message me and you can get copies of this, stick up the poster next to where they're working. And so they would always have it in mind as they're writing, and they'd have that visual memory. Remember, we're looking at multisensory learning. It's not just about read, write, listen, write, talk, write. You want to have, the touch and the sight in terms of images and different things. And, we want to have that interaction as best as possible to help the students work things out. All right. Emotions worksheet. Actually, this one I'm revising it in terms of making the stories more exciting. I'm going to be giving out like maybe one or two sections of this. So not the whole booklet, but just like one. I think I have in mind like one section, but it has two parts. Um, that would help you with developing that. And there's an activity in here that you definitely want to get a copy of this booklet. If your child is not writing exciting stories and you don't know what else to do, 12-point plot, emotions worksheets. Those are the two main things that would really, really help you. Descriptions are great, but then we can get bogged down with descriptions, and sometimes the descriptions don't make any sense and they don't work well to increase the excitement in the story. Descriptions don't increase excitement in a story. Emotional responses to conflict increase excitement in a story. And so that's what we want to get to. All right. Comprehension practice. Let's get to that. Let's see. Let me stop share the screen. I'm going to look at the 2024 exam and we're going to look at keywords in particular. I'm using the 2024 exam because it will be the closest one to what the 2025 exam will be. Um, because I know based on the documents that were released, for the 25 to 28 period, the format for the exam is going to be like what this one is. And so let's take a look at the questions. I'm just going to point out a couple things with keywords in the questions, and then we'd wrap it up today. All right. So questions. The main thing I want to talk about with questions um, would be the words that would help students really understand what the question is looking for. And the thing with keywords is that I read an article once that said, keywords could mislead students and whatnot. The idea is that you have to know what kind of question you're responding to in order to know how to use the keywords. So, for example, in a literal question, like number one, what time of day did the story take place? The keywords are time and day. So let's say, let me get that phrase, time of day, right? And then, so that keyword. We know these are the keywords because what is the question asking us? Well, they want to know about the time. Time of what? The story? Well, we know that's what we're responding to. So, story isn't going to be in the passage, take place isn't going to be in the passage. You're likely to find an idea of time in the passage. And so, with this one, if we go back up to the passage, um, where we're looking for words that deal with time. And so in this case, the idea of keywords is that keywords function in two different ways. So you can find the actual keyword in the passage, or you can find a word that's a synonym or representation of the keyword. And so if we're skimming through this passage, and then we could skim um, to find information. Um, there was, so we have the word time here, but it doesn't give an actual time. It just says the time has come. All right, so then I keep going. Blink of an eye. So stuff is happening, chilling silence, and we're skimming. I glance curiously at the ring, and then I see the word morning here. So morning is a representation of time, and so I pause and I read the sentence. I shook my head and wandered outside to let the mid-morning sun caress my face. So that I get my answer. It is mid-morning. So that when we're looking at keywords, we have to really understand how keywords help in comprehension. And they do a couple things. One, they help you if you can find the actual keyword in the passage that directs you to the answer. But sometimes, like in this case, we don't actually have the word time used to tell us the time. We actually have just a representation of time, which is morning, and that helps direct us to the answer. And so when we're looking at keywords, we're looking at a couple of things. We're not just looking for the actual word in the sentence or in the passage or poem. We're actually looking for the keyword itself, the actual word. That's one option. But we're also looking for representations of that word that can guide us to the answer. Right? So this one, an example of simile and metaphor. So again, simile, metaphor, these would be the keywords. And we're not going to see the words simile and metaphor, but what are we going to do? We're going to see representations of those words, examples of those words, right? So keywords, example, simile, metaphor, and those are guiding keywords. Give the meaning of the following words. So these are literal keywords because we're going to be looking for these words in the line to get the context. State two reasons why the father thought the son was ready to receive the ring. So we're looking at ring, receive, and father. Those are the keywords here. Yes, son, but whose reasons are we looking for? We're looking for father's reasons, and that's why that is important. And so identify the keywords. We might not get the actual keywords in the story, but we can get a direction of where the answers would be by looking at the keyword itself. So we scan for that first. And while we're scanning, we're also keeping in mind any word that represents one of the keywords would also help us, you know, being a guide to the story. And so that's something that I'd like you to really pay attention to. Keywords work, but it's how you use the keywords. And then when you have like a full sentence answer to give, you are going to be using keywords from the question to rephrase or put directly into the answer. So the keywords are not only to help you find the references in the passage, but they also help you formulate your answers to the questions. And so that is something to really pay attention to as you go through comprehension and comprehension practice. All right, so for this week, review the types of questions and the SEA requirements, because if you get the 2025 to 2028, um, what do they call it? Assessment framework. If you get a copy of that, there's a section marked comprehension, and it tells you, it lists the kinds of questions that will be asked along with what level the question is. Is it literal? Is it inferential? Is it an evaluation appreciation question? So it tells you this kind of question is going to be, these are options that you could get, and these are the types of questions. So you have an answer, an idea of how to respond to those kinds of questions when you see them. And so you definitely want to get that to review the requirements. And then you want to look at questions in terms of keywords. Can the child identify keywords effectively? Do they know how to use keywords to find the answer and write the answer? And then you want to do comprehension, and you want to have a passage, a poem, a graphic. And I actually recommend the two different types of passages. So you want one fiction and you want a non-fiction as well. And so with these, the worksheets that I have, you get two of each. So you can put them together and use, so you have two fiction, two nonfiction, two fiction, two poems, two graphics. And I know I've been saying this for a few weeks now, but my promise is that you would get the second round of these within the next couple weeks. So before the end of the term, so that you could use them during the vacation. That's the plan. My intention was like at the beginning of this term, but for the life of me, that did not work out. But you'd be able to get them the other set. So if you have these already, then I'm going to get you to the second set. If you don't, get a copy. Past papers with answers and explanations. If you don't already have that, get a copy, because then you'd be able to analyze the questions and review the actual SEA questions yourself. Because as I said last week, and I will continuously keep saying, some of those practice tests are different. Let me just put it that way. They don't exactly follow the SEA format, and they don't quite it kind of throw students off a little bit. So you definitely want to see what the SE questions look like. And the best way to do that is past papers. And you have grouped them. So you have all the passages together, all the fiction together, non-fiction. You have the passages together. You have all the poems together, all the graphics together. So you can look at them back to back and see what they look like, what the items themselves look like, and what the questions look like. So you can see what the recurring questions and so on. And that is really going to help in terms of preparation for the exam. All right. So thank you so much. Today was a day, but we did cover quite a lot. And thank you for those of you who were able to stick around. If you popped in and out, I appreciate you just taking the time. If you're looking at the recording, thank you so much. Remember, if you have questions, send me your questions, right? So that I could deal with them. And of course, we have um, I have the workshops coming in December. How to give feedback to get better writing. How to teach sentence structure to improve writing, how to teach descriptions that actually make sense and work with stories that students can use. We don't want to have them memorizing stuff and that's just dropping it in and you're thinking, huh, how is this working together? No, we want to help them come up with their own and work on it effectively. And then we want to teach students how to get that exciting story. That's the last one that I'll be doing. And once I get through with these, I'm going to do these more often because rather than doing the whole program, I feel like, a teacher could really level up and a parent can get exactly what they need to support their child with the separate workshops. But of course, I'm going to recommend all, but it depends on what you're doing. I mean, they're priced pretty reasonably at 375 a session, and you're going to get worksheets as well. I mean, think about it that way. Yeah. So if you want to do all of them, I'm willing to give a discount if you want to do all four. So send me a WhatsApp message, 7174993, and I'll let you know what that discount is. All right. So thank you for joining me and having a little time of it this morning. But I'm hoping that the session was helpful. All right. Have a wonderful rest of the day today, and I'll see you next week. Bye bye.